Okay, so once more, we've won the revolution. Now what? So the problem is going to become, how do we govern this monster that we have created? And we have created a monster.
If you need to charge, I can.
Oh no, I'm good, but thank you. So our founding fathers wisely began to try and sort of figure out, what are we going to do when we win? Because I mean, really, the thought of loss is pretty unacceptable when you know if you lose, you're going to hang. So rather than working from the assumption that there's going to be a loss, we work from the assumption of, now what do we do because we've won? And so most Americans don't realize, but the Constitution you live under is not the first government of the United States of America. It's the second government of the United States of America. Theoretically, it's the fourth government that we've lived under as Americans, because you lived under the British government until we declared ourselves independent. Then you lived under the Continental Congresses. Then we went to the Articles of Confederation. And here's the thing. Our founding fathers messed some stuff up. We're willing to go, yeah, we messed that up, and then go back and revisit it. So nobody gets everything right 100% of the time, and our founding fathers didn't either. So a couple of things to know. First of all, I put the word Confederation on here, and I really want you to start to glue the word Confederation in your brains, because it seems like spring is years from now, but in reality, we're going to be talking about the Civil War before you can blink, and I need you to know what a confederation is. So a confederation is a loose union of countries that have agreed to work together with limited power in a central government. Okay, so if each of our table in here was an independent country, but it is to our advantage to work together, we might decide that we will take one person from each of these countries, put them together, and let them make some decisions. But they're not super powerful because each one of you is still a country, and you can pull out of the Confederacy whenever you want to. Okay? Confederation. Constitution. We talk about our Constitution all the time. Kids, when they're irritated with me, will oftentimes whip out their constitutional rights without really knowing what constitutions are. A constitution is just laws and procedures that govern a country. It's just a list of laws. So ratification is fancy talk for we took a vote and came to an agreement. So if something is ratified, it's been voted on, and we have agreed to it. Okay, sovereign is also fancy talk. For we are independent and have the right to govern ourselves, and it is recognized by other people. The United States is a sovereign nation today. Russia is a sovereign nation. North Korea is a sovereign nation. Australia, sovereign nation. Okay, they're a country. It has been recognized that they have the right to rule themselves. A republic is a country or a state in which supreme power is held by the people. But we can't be a pure democracy because I don't have that kind of time, nor do I have that kind of patience, and the Americas are real big. So I can't go running off to DC every time there's a decision to be made, and neither can Mrs. Cook. She's got a baby.
I bet I could.
You might be able to, Daedric. Let me know when that day comes, because we might elect you as our representative, because what we need are people like Daedric who have the time to run off all the time. I follow a woman on Twitter. She's a well-known writer in her own regard, but she is married to a senator from Ohio. And all the time she's like, well, sadly enough, I sent my husband off to DC this morning because he had to go do important work. Okay, so you live in a republic because we don't collectively have time to go to DC all the time. Plus, they don't have room for like 200 million of us in the building to cast our vote. So we're going to elect people like Daedric who do have the time and desire to go and represent us. So if I don't like how Daedric thinks, if I disagree with him, I'm going to vote for McKenna. Okay. Sometimes my vote may work and I might get McKenna because other people might agree with me, or it might be like Eli and the majority of the people in here, they disagree with me and they're going to send Daedric. That's how republics work. Everybody gets to have their say. The people who get the most say get to send their person. Okay? If you want your person to go, you best convince some others. So the Revolutionary War starts in April of 1775, and it is long. Like, I don't think we really adequately consider just how long this thing went on. It ends in 1783. And people, it's a haul of just suffering. Suffering. The people who fought this thing, they suffered for it. The battles are terrifying, and that's bad enough, but living away from your family, it's one of the reasons I wanted you to look at like the lives of soldiers. Living in filth, living in hunger, no supplies, no food, no clothes. And worst of all is the disease. You're probably not going to die gallantly in battle. You're probably going to die of disease. Because again, you're living in squalor. And so this thing is a haul. And the fact that our ancestors committed to it is pretty remarkable. So the Articles are the first Constitution of the United States, but you gotta like really try and think about how they were thinking about things, because in the minds of our ancestors, the person who is the enemy is not really the British people, and it's not really the British government. It is the King of Great Britain. It is the King of England, George. God love him. He was a little senile by the time this thing all got over. He really was. So the first Articles, this first Constitution, it's actually ratified on March the 1st, 1781. So they actually agree on it 2 years before the war actually ends. And like everything, we wrestle our way to it because these people do not agree on anything. You could go out and say the sun is shining and somebody else would come out and say, no, it's not. Like, our ancestors don't agree on a single thing. It's partly why we're going to end up in a civil war. So from the start of the revolution, American leaders feel like we have to come together to defeat the British. Remember Ben Franklin and his famous, we must all hang together or we will surely hang separately. Like, Ben's putting into words sort of this general feeling like, if we don't do this together, guys, we're doomed. Done. Gonna be over faster than you can blink. Okay? So this idea starts that, okay, we're buying into the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment says that you have specific rights. It's next door. McKenna's like giving me sign language, like it's coming from there. So Enlightenment, you have specific rights, and people should have a say in their government. You want to know what terrifies rich white guys who are in power? The idea that people should have a say in their government. It's like, oh no, what will the common man do? Will be terrifying, right? So there are those that are really fearful of a central authority, a king. And they feel like this new nation is frankly too big to govern as a republic. Like, it's big and it's only going to grow because, woohoo, we're crossing the Appalachian and displacing native people. We got it, peeps. We're going, right? We won this war. Who cares what the British government wanted? We're going to go pick wars everywhere. Okay? So it's going to be too large to govern, and lawmakers would not be able to remain in touch with the people they represented, which will eventually lead to a king. So they fear the idea of a republic. They're like in a catch-22 because they don't want a king, but they're afraid if they have a republic, like they're going to get a king anyway. Rock meet hard place. And the idea that they can't be in contact with their people, that's a legit concern. Remember, 1770s, you can't even really travel easily. There's no plane, there's no train, there's no vehicle, and there is no phone, let alone a cell phone. And God knows they couldn't conceive of the internet. Right? That would just be mystical magic that they could not understand. So, again, wrestle their way to what they think is going to work. So, most Americans do not see us as a unified country. They see us as a confederacy. So, please wrap your brains around this. Civil war on the horizon. Each state, country. Today, when you hear geographers and people who like do political science on an international level, they will frequently talk about like the state of Russia. And they don't mean like, how's Russia doing? They mean like the country of Russia. Or the state of Argentina. They're talking about state and country being the same thing. So the fact that we are United States, United Countries, guys, they conceive this as a confederacy. Each state then having their own government, their own money, being in charge of their own trade. So think if this had lasted. Today, like we love to go up to Michigan because, you know, it's not very far from here to Michigan. It's pretty up there. We like to go. Every time we went to Michigan, we would be crossing into a different country. It would require, at a minimum, I'm sure, a passport, customs, and probably money changing before we could go on in. And that's if it's friendly border. Like what happens if Michigan declares war on Indiana?
We'll smoke them.
Maybe. There's more of them than us. And I feel like people in the UP are probably hardier than Hoosiers. They live in very cold weather.
Exactly.
Right? So that is how our ancestors perceived the nation. Not as a nation, but as a bunch of nations. 13 to be exact. Okay, so, but here's the problem. We have to have something because no other country in the world wants to deal with 13 of us. Because frankly, we're annoying. So no country wants to be like, okay, I have got my agreement in place with Georgia, so now I'm headed to the Carolinas, and hopefully I can get something worked out with South Carolina before I have to go to North Carolina. Nobody wants to do that. So we have to have some form of central government. Like there has to be a group of people somewhere that somebody can come and talk to. Because we are going to need to get some help. And we have got to be recognized as a country. And think about like Rhode Island would have been a country. I mean, that's a teeny tiny little country. What other country in the world is going to be like, yeah, Rhode Island, we got you back. I mean, there's only like 2,000 of you, but we got you. Whatever. So they, again, I really want you to start to understand our ancestors fight their way to everything. And that's because starting on Monday, we're going to start talking about the Constitution. And that is flatly an all-out peaceful war. Like it's Cold War declared in Philadelphia. So please understand, they wrestle with all of it. And you know why? Because they cared. And they wanted you to live in a country that meant something. And they had fought for it for a really long time, and people died in really heinous ways. So 6 drafts of this first Constitution are written. 6. The first one is written by Franklin in 1775. He writes it before we ever declare ourselves independent. And people were like, Ben, you crazy old man. And they never really thought about it. That one just kind of got tossed to the side. The fourth one's the one that matters. It's written by a man by the name of John Dickinson. He's from Pennsylvania, and he writes it in June of 1776. Everybody knows that there is a committee working on the Declaration of Independence, like Jefferson and Jay and Adams and Franklin. They're writing this thing. Really, you know, Jefferson was writing it, but they're working on it. And so John Dickinson says if we're going to be independent, we better start thinking about what our country's going to look like. So he writes this fourth one in June. And they fight about it for a year, really more than a year. They fight over it until November of 1777. Tear it apart, they rewrite parts of it, they change it a ton. John Dickinson's probably like, this is not what I wrote by the time they agree on something. And then they send it off to the states to vote on it. It has to be ratified. How can you have a government for a confederacy if the other countries in your confederacy don't agree to it? So like everybody's gonna ratify except New York. New York's your biggest, or Virginia. If you don't have those guys in, you don't have anything that matters, because you can have all the little states or little countries that you want. If you don't have the big ones where most people live, who cares? Okay, so they sent it out to get ratified. By 1779, another 2 years, everybody has ratified it except Maryland. Maryland's mad. They're like, we're not signing this. And the reason why they're mad is because, right, we have now won, or we're real close to. In 1779, people were like, hey, we might win this thing. Like, we might actually survive. And so the other states, the big ones, were like, oh, yeah. They know the Mississippi River is out there because we've been that far, right? And they just claimed all the territory to it. So today, I believe we would have been a part of either New York or Virginia. Like, they were just like, yeah, I'm taking all that. Well, Maryland missed the boat. They didn't get that, and they wanted to claim some land because they thought they could sell it to people like our ancestors for money. It's land speculation. They're grabbing it so they can sell it. So Maryland's like, no, I'm not paying. We're not joining. So Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia, Connecticut, they all claim land all the way to the Mississippi River. Oops, sorry about that. Land speculators in Maryland want the land to belong to the United States. Really, they're like, let's make it all the United States. That's very much politician talk for we want peace. So the states are going to remain sovereign. Each state is a country. Congress is going to be a last resort to solve problems. They're not going to come right to the rescue all the time. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. Congress can make treaties, they can maintain an army, and they can print money. So they can make agreements like with France. That's pretty important. They can have a standing army, and they can print money. What's the problem with printing money?
You print too much and you get inflation.
That's right. Money is only as good as people's confidence in it. So if you have too much money in the system, that money loses value. Let me give you an example. After World War I, Germany is decimated, right? Decimated. So they're going to solve their problem, and they owe a bunch of money to a whole bunch of people, and that's how we get World War II. That's a story for another day. So they owe a bunch of money, and so they're like, we'll solve this. They just print money. Print it like crazy. You needed a wheelbarrow full of money by the time they were done to buy a loaf of bread. People wallpapered their houses with money because it was cheaper than buying wallpaper to keep the cold out. The more you print, the less it's worth. So here's the problems. This thing is rife with problems, but hey, let's give them some credit. They didn't know. They're just doing the best they can, right? Each state has one vote in Congress, regardless of the size of the population. So that means Rhode Island has as much weight as Virginia. Congress could not tax anybody for anything. So if I'm Congress, I can have an army. Awesome. I just can't pay you. Because I can't tax anybody to collect money to pay you. That is how the government pays its bills. It taxes us. So when I get my check, about 20% of it's gone. Why? Because the state of Indiana plus the state of the United States takes some money out of my check to pay for important things like roads and a standing army. Okay, so I can have an army, I just can't pay it because I can't levy taxes, nor can I regulate trade or commerce. That is problematic. It's a problem. I cannot regulate trade or commerce. So, like Virginia can have one trade deal with New York and a totally different trade deal with North Carolina. trade deals all over the place. Plus, I'm making deals with everybody I can get my hands on overseas. Spain, when I have a deal with Virginia, awesome, right? And I'm going to shut everybody else out of that deal. Like my deal with Spain includes you can't trade with anybody else, right? So no ability to regulate trade or money. No executive branch. There's no president because they're freaked out about the idea of a king. Not helped by some other people who are like, let's just make a king and go on about life, right? So there's no executive branch because a king might become a tyrant, a dictator. So there's nobody to enforce the laws, right? How would be like this building without an administrator in it? Imagine what this joint would look like if we did not have Mr. McDaniel, Mr. Lacey, or Mr. Fennell. The good times will roll. The building will burn down in a couple of days, but hey, we had fun while we watched it burn, right? There's no national court system. No national court system. So every state has a different court system. It's a hot mess. There's no court system. There is a way to amend the articles. Amending is just fancy talk for changing, and that's what word you need to lock in your brain too. Constitution upcoming. So an amendment is just a change to the document. So like our Constitution has been amended a bunch of times. But in order to do that, every state, every country had to agree to the change. They cannot agree on what time of day it is, let alone to make a change to this document. And in order to get a new law passed, 9 of the 13 of them have to agree to a new law. Right? I mean, you might as well just sit down and wait for the end of your life to come up old age before that's going to happen. I don't know. I wasn't there. I mean, I'm old, but not old enough to have been at the Articles of Confederation debates. All right, so here's what happens. Bad things. And by the way, we lived under this for quite a few years. Like, it wasn't like, hey, we were under this for a day or two. No, we were quite a few years. So the states argue with each other like they're fighting all the time. They refuse to support the national government financially. They're like, why? You can't make me. I shall not send you any money. Congress cannot enforce any laws, so they have no enforcement power. States make agreements with foreign countries, foreign powers, foreign countries. States raise their own armies and print their own money. Like, this is a powder keg gonna explode. And they have high debts, which causes a real problem economically, like depression, which is economic talk for people can't find jobs and they don't have any money and they're going hungry and losing their houses. Problems. So all of this is going to come to a head in the form of a man by the name of Daniel Shays, who's really kind of a cool person. Daniel Shays is sort of an unlikely hero of history. So Daniel Shays comes about because each state is responsible for paying off their own Revolutionary War debt. So in the South, they get that paid off fast. You know why? Because the South is where the most money in the nation is, and that's because they're built on slave labor, right? So the northern states, though, they're having a hard time paying these debts. And like France is like, hey, we got a war of our own. Pay up, people. They want their money. So what do you do to get that? You have to have taxes on your people. When you need to raise more money, you raise the taxes. But you have people who are living in a depression. They don't have money to pay. None. And they have to be paid in cash in a nation where cash is not common. Most people pay their bills by barter. So if I need something from you, I will trade you with something I have to get it, but it's not only money. This is a real issue for farmers who can normally get through hard times because they grow what they need to eat and they trade for what they don't have. But now they got to pay their taxes in cash and they don't have any cash. So what happens then is, since they can't pay, they lose their farm. And here's the thing, because it takes us a while to figure out how to be a really good republic, there are voting requirements that basically make it so that only wealthy white men can vote. Wealthy white guys. Because you know what terrifies wealthy white guys in power? The idea that other people might vote. Because what if we vote for them not to be so wealthy? So only rich white guys can vote. So here, think about what you are setting up. You are setting up unreasonable taxes on people who have no say in their government. Oh my mercy, that sounds very familiar. So many of these guys, including Daniel Shays, they fought in the Revolution. What in the free world did they fight for? If you're going to turn around and act exactly like the government that they just tried to get rid of. So when they fail to pay their taxes, they're in prison, their farms are foreclosed on. So in 1786, 1,500 men went to the town of Northampton under the leadership of Daniel Shays, and they shut down the courts. You're not going to foreclose on farms today because we're not going to let you. September 1786, Daniel Shays, who was a captain in the Continental Army, and we almost know nothing about Daniel Shays. We know he's been married a couple of times, and I'll tell you what happens to him here at the end. But he leads an armed force, and he closes down the courthouse at Springfield. Springfield's famous today because there's a real famous armory there, and they make a very fine rifle that has been used by the Army for about a zillion years. Right, the Springfield Army. So he goes to that town and they close down the courthouse. You're not foreclosing on people today. You're not taking their farms because it's the cruelest thing ever. What they do is they will come, they will kick you out of your house, and while you stand there and watch, they sell everything you own to pay your taxes. So that was really successful. So in January 1787, Daniel Shays leads another group of armed men, and they're just going to take over the arsenal there, and they're going to arm up. And then they're going to start shooting people. And why not? Got a government you've got no say in, they're doing unreasonable things to you in the name of taxes. That sounds like a reason to shoot people. It certainly was in 1775. So it doesn't go as well this time. They're met by a 1,200-man militia led by General William Shepherd. And they're forced to retreat. Oh man, my men lost an N. So 20 men are wounded and 4 are killed, and they're on the run, including Daniel Shays. They're scattered, and then they're followed by a guy by the name of General Benjamin Lincoln, and they're defeated and scattered again at Petersham, and that ended the rebellion. Shays and several other men are arrested and sentenced to hang. My gosh, this all sounds so familiar, doesn't it? But Shays and those other men applied for a pardon, and he received it. So he was pardoned and allowed to go home. And we know that he ends up living to be like 86 years old and marries a couple times and has kids. But man, did this scare people bad. Because now rich white guys are like, oh, the rabble is rousing, right? This is gonna be bad. So now you got people who are like, nope, there are problems with these articles. So for farmers, you got a government that doesn't care about the will of the people. They're telling you, we don't like this, and you're ignoring them. Merchants, bankers, the government seems like it is vulnerable to anarchy. Like the government is so powerless that people are just going to run around and burn things down. So here's this idea, like we're gonna have more of these. It's gonna continue to happen if we don't do something different. So they call for a convention. We're gonna amend, we're gonna fix the articles. All right, so that amending becomes something entirely different, and we're gonna start talking about that entirely different thing on Monday. but here's what you're gonna do for the rest of your time with us, okay? I want you to do some thinking. So, Howard Zinn, of course, weighs in on this, right? Howard Zinn, remember Howard Zinn, the guy who's all about like the little guy and the rude white men are the enemies of all of humanity. So he weighs in on this and he says that Shays' rebellion and the government reaction to it is hypocritical. What's it mean to be a hypocrite?
Kind of pretty much getting someone to do something around doing it and saying that's okay.
That's exactly right. Is that do as I say, not as I do kind of attitude, okay? So you're going to tell me why Zinn sees this reaction to what Shays did as hypocritical. Then, do you agree with Zinn? Do you think that his point is legitimate? Is he right in what he thinks? And then finally, why must governments start to stop rebellions? Why is it really important that those rebellions begin to be stopped? We're going to revisit rebellion again in the Whiskey Rebellion, and you're going to be surprised at what happens in that one. So why is it important that the government starts to stand up to these rebellions? Okay, one full paragraph. Yep, I just want to make sure I didn't like surprise myself with the fourth one. One full paragraph for each of these. A full paragraph being 5 to 7 sentences. These are all critical thinkers. So I am looking for the quality of your brain power. Those of you who do things like this as if you are the fastest human being alive, when you get all done, read your book. Okay?
We need to apply websites.
Nope, this is all critical thinking.
I need to go get my backpack.
You probably should definitely do that.
I will.